Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. Today we're doing another special episode of Mohe with Jenny Park, celebrating Asian American Pacific Islander Month. For this whole month, I'm doing 2 episodes a week where I sit down with different Asian leaders to talk about the jobs that they love, how they got there, and how they're embracing their Asian American identity today. I'm super excited because it's a bunch of folks with just fun and creative jobs, and people with jobs that I didn't see a lot growing up, from Asian leaders in comms and brand roles to authors, makeup artists, professors, the whole gamut. So I'm really excited. For this first episode, I'm sitting down with Jenny Lee, who is the author of the new young adult series, Anna K, which the sequel, Anna K Away, just came out recently. If you haven't read either of those books, they're super fun and I highly recommend it. So as I talk with Jenny today, we're hearing about her story, how she became a writer, what inspired her to write Anna K, and a little bit of the fun behind the scenes of the process. So hope you enjoy this episode. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe for more episodes like this. Hi, Jenny. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Jenny. Well, I'm happy to be here. Do Jenny.
I know, we have to distinguish. So I'm Jenny Park and you're Jenny Lee. Before I was married, I was Jenny Kim. And I think we just covered like the 3 most basic Korean last names.
It's always Park Kimberly, always. Yeah.
Congratulations on Anna K. I want to say, I know the last few months for you have been huge with the paperback launch, and I've seen it covered in Marie Claire and Time, and it's now even in the works for a TV show. How are you feeling about all of it?
Great. I'm especially great that the sequel is about to drop next week on Tuesday. So it's finally that's done, because that was a little bit of a beast for me because I was working on it during the pandemic, which is obviously not the most creative time.
Wait, so how long was that process from when you finished writing to when it actually goes to launch?
Comes out. I wrote the first book, Anna K, probably in 2018. So then that sold the fall of 2018, and then it didn't come out till March of 2020. There's usually a 1.5 year lag sometimes, but the actual sequel, we already had that in the works. So by last March, pre-pandemic, I was probably 75% done with the book already, the sequel. But then I really scrapped half of it. I just needed to, because I thought the whole climate changed. I wasn't sure what was going to happen. So I really did tons of rewrites. And then I went down a very dark spiral of what should the sequel be, and et cetera. Because, the first book was basically was a retelling of Anna Karenina from Tolstoy. Yeah. And now the second book was a sequel, same characters, but no, I no longer had a plot guide. It was just all me. And I was like, oh, it'll be fine. And then I was like, oh yeah, not so easy. Sequels.
I can't wait. Okay, there's so many questions about Anna K that I want to ask you, but first I'd love to talk about you and your journey.
Absolutely.
The first question I always love to ask is, what did you want to be when you were younger, and what did your parents want you to be?
I always wanted to be a writer when I was a little kid. I've always loved going. I just remember going to the library all the time. And then I do remember those, you get certain stars or rankings for how many books you read over the summer, and being very Asian and a little bit competitive. My mom's like, you can win this every summer. So I usually did well, but I loved it. That's really what I did in the summer.
I was nodding my head vigorously when you were talking about the library, because that was exactly what my summers were like. And I used to get these did you have Oberweis in Tennessee?
No, what is that?
It's an ice cream shop.
Right.
It's like a Baskin Robbins and whatever. And it was partnered with the library. So I would always collect all of these Baskin Robbins coupons, and it would make my mom so happy because we'd get free ice cream. But all those books, I do remember reading that. So that's so fun.
My parents, of course, had very different viewpoints. They wanted me to go to an Ivy League school. They wanted me to go to UPenn because they were like, oh, you can't get into Harvard. They were very pragmatic. They're like, you can't get into Harvard. My brother got into Harvard. So it's you're off the hook. They're like, you can go to UPenn and become a lawyer. It was just told to me that was the plan.
Is that what you did?
No, that is not what I did. What's funny is that my senior year, we grew up in Tennessee, so there weren't that many other Asian people. My father was a doctor. And so we always lived in different small towns. And he was usually the one, we were the one Asian family in high school. I mean, there was one other family that was a Chinese couple, but they had no children. So everyone in this small town knew who I was. They're like, oh, you must be Dr. Lee's daughter. I'm like, yes, how'd you guess? It was an odd sort of upbringing. I can't say that there were 6 other Korean families that my father knew from medical school that had all settled in the South, that he had classmates. And so they each had 3 kids, and we would see them every New Year's Eve. So it's 18 Korean kids once a year. But other than that,
I'd say Yunori or something.
Yeah, so that's kind of how it started. And then when I decided I wanted to be a writer, I won a couple writing contests in high school. And then NYU school, Tish reached out to me and I was like, oh my God, I've never even thought about art school. I'd only known about the Ivies. And so I applied early, secretly, while my mom knew, but we didn't tell my dad. And then I got in and I was like, this is where I want to go. And my dad's like, no, I'm not paying for that. And I'm like, okay, well then I'm not going to go to college because I'm not going to send in any other applications. And we had a total standoff through the summer. And finally he agreed. He was like, okay, you can go, but you don't get to see the school. So when I went to NYU, I had never been to New York City before ever. They just dropped bye-bye. And I'm like, all right, bye. And I was all like, I can do this. I was a little terrified, I have to admit, because I mean, my brother was obviously at school in Boston, so it's not like I had never been to a big city, but New York is New York. You're like, whoa.
Especially a different world from Tennessee.
Absolutely, for sure. But I loved it. I mean, I fell in love with the city immediately. It was amazing. So
that's really special to like identify your joy for writing as a kid and to be able to follow that string all the way through.
And I think because I was the youngest, it's easier to stand up, I think, to your parents then. Like, you know what I mean? In the Asian family dynamic, especially after my brother got into Harvard and was going to become an MD, PhD. You know what I mean? And he did. So I was like, you have that. Why can't I do whatever I want? And ultimately it all worked out. And ultimately, you know, obviously I've met with some success, so it's been fine. But they kept telling me they're like, an artist's life is very difficult. And like, you know, it was like I was born here, but they had immigrated obviously from Korea. And they were like, it's, you know what, we want that. We want a better, easier life for you. And I was like, that's what I want though. So whether that was like kind of the American dream, but it's true. And it worked out. So all good.
Yeah. So you were in New York then. When did you start to get your foot in the door in this industry? I feel like becoming a writer is the most elusive process to me. So what did that process look like for you?
In my 20s, I had Anna Kay has written about all these like New York teenagers who were very wealthy. I was not that kid at all. So I was always like working jobs at NYU, etc. But I knew that's what I wanted to do. But after college, I needed a job. So I went into book publishing. So I was just an assistant in book publishing and I had a great time in my 20s. It's super fun. There were book parties because I loved books so much. And that was the goal. But there was a time like maybe, I don't know, my mid 20s when I was like, I don't know, I'm just a part of it, but I want to do it. And I just wasn't making the time to like write, etc. So I knew that needed to be a goal of mine. So my goal was like by 30, I will sell a book. And so I did sell my first book like right before I turned 30. I did a nonfiction book proposal about marriage, my first year of marriage, but I'm no longer married to him. That was my first marriage. So it's one of those ones where I'm like, yes, that was my first book, but yeah, I'm no longer married. But it was a comedic humor essay book. And it was great. I had a great experience. I did a big 14 city book tour. So it was really kind of happening. So I think, you know, right from like age 30, I've been able to like make a living as a writer, which is rare. And I'm very thankful for it. So I was like, but there's been a lot of like ups and downs and like finance wise, it is definitely not stable. Only now I'm like pretty stable, you know, in terms of it. But it was always worth it to me. I'm like, I'll be a poor starving artist. I don't mind.
When you were younger, do you remember what your favorite book was or your favorite genre?
Oh, absolutely. I love the Boxcar Children. I don't know if you remember, like I loved that book. And I also I read all the Nancy Drews. So it wasn't really about mysteries. Where the Red Fern Grows. Anything with dogs and
sad.
Yeah, so sad. I love a sad book. I think that is why I loved Anna Karenina so much too. Because I read that when I was 15 for the very first time. And I was like, oh, I loved it. I loved the drama and the tragedy of it all. So it was kind of like my thing. And so that's when, you know, so I've read that book 3 or 4 times before I came up with the idea to adapt it for a modern day retelling.
For me growing up, and maybe similar for you, Jenny, I didn't see a lot of Asian authors or even Asians as the lead characters of stories. I think now we're starting to see that, which is incredible, from Crazy Rich Asians to All the Boys I've Loved. But before then, that was pretty rare. They were some sort of side character or reduced some sort of stereotype. When you were starting Anna Kay,
right,
it's more of a lighthearted book, but it does explore some sort of like, it's nice. It's not flat tone and being just positive. It does explore some sort of like complexity. Was that important to you? Or did you always want to have some sort of mystery in your books?
I always knew that, you know, I was a little uncomfortable with the whole like, oh, these adaptation. Obviously, everyone's been doing Shakespeare and Jane Austen forever. And I didn't really know that young adult, it was like a thing. I didn't know that there were so many retellings of fairy tales and myths. I don't know. I just wasn't aware of it, how popular it was in young adult fiction. So when I came up with the idea, it was sort of an organic thing where I saw the movie in 2012 and I was like, oh, this would be such a great teen drama. I am definitely much more like, fun and soapy. So I was like, I wanted to do like a very fun version. I definitely knew I wanted to change the ending because I was like, yeah, the girl had a raw deal in the original. And I definitely wanted to make sure Anna in my book had a much better go of it. And also I definitely knew from the start, I was absolutely always going to make her Korean or half Korean, which is what I did.
Oh, wow.
I just always immediately envisioned it that way, that she was probably, I made her half Korean because I did want the idea that her father wanted to get her, into New York society. And by doing that, maybe he somewhat calculated marrying a white woman to like get that done, to accomplish that for his kids, wanting the best for his kids, because he had the money already. And he was like, oh, to get the status, you kind of need to go into like old money, old money New York, basically. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of what he did. It never is really expressly, that's like the backstory in my head of what happened, basically. Because I did want, it was very important for me to write a very inclusive cast of characters. Like I just wanted that. Like in TV, my work in TV, I worked on the Disney Channel show Shake It Up with Zendaya. It was Zendaya's first show, with Bella Thorne. So when I was doing that, I will say that, a lot of people have opinions about Disney, but as a company, what they are great at is they've always been pushing like, diversity. And it's just the idea that by seeing like a colored cultural cast, basically, that's just like the norm. They didn't comment on race, etc. in any of the shows, but they wanted kids to be able to like see themselves reflected on TV when they're young, which I think is very important. It's exactly what we were just talking about. There weren't that many Asian, authors or, main characters at all to read about when we were young, but now there really is. So I think that is a great thing.
Yeah, before Anna K too, you got to work on some really fun shows and networks. And I actually saw that you worked on Young and Hungry, which was like a guilty pleasure of mine that I absolutely loved. Can you tell us how did those opportunities come about and what was like the funnest part of being on those shows?
A couple of my books have been optioned for TV before. So I was like, oh, maybe I should explore TV writing, but I wasn't sure if I wanted to move to Los Angeles because that's sort of a requirement. But then I came out and I sort of met some people and I ended up getting on a show in like 2006 and like subletting my apartment and just trying it. And what's great about TV writing and producing is it's a group effort where writing books is a little bit lonely. I mean, it's a solitary profession. And, as much as I love words and writing, that's like not really my personality. So I really took to TV writing very quickly. It just is fun. I mean, a comedy room, especially like Young and Hungry, was actually created by David Holden, one of my closest friends. And it's just a fun room. It's like 8 to 10 people, comedy writers in a room writing all those episodes. And so I worked on that for at least 4, I think I did 4 seasons. I don't think I did the last season, but it was such a great experience. It's like putting on a show every week. There's 125 people that go into making a TV show like Young and Hungry.
So wow. And what was like your role like? Are you writing the script? Are you consulting on the script?
I was one of the staff. I mean, I was a writer on that show for the first 4 seasons. So I was one of the 10 writers who helped work on every episode. So I was a writer producer by then. How you start in TV writing is like you're a baby writer or you're a staff writer and you're not a producer. And so you're just working on the scripts and you're in a room with people. But then as you kind of slowly climb up the ranks, you become a co-producer. And that means, you have a little bit more responsibilities in the production of the actual episodes. So on Shake It Up, I was the writer in charge of like working with the wardrobe, which was super fun. So I would go in and like, okay, all the, the clothes that the girls were wearing. I wasn't picking them out, but they would show me. And then if we had an issue or we needed something like in one of the scripts and we needed like a particular dress or it to look a certain way, it was my job to go and check with wardrobe about that. So that's always been fun. I've always loved wardrobe. It's fun.
That's amazing. Even as I read Anna K, and I was like, I need to know what these characters look like. And more importantly, I need to know what Anna and all these people are wearing.
Fun that I had in the, pandemic when it was just like, there was obviously we weren't leaving our apartment. There was nowhere to go. There was no, I wasn't doing any shopping of my own. So when I was researching the book, whenever she was at an event that I needed to write, I would look up exactly the designer's resort line of that exact time period and look for dresses for her because it was just fun for me. Or I would type in most expensive designer pajamas, always things like that. So that, researching the book, the best nightclub in Seoul, Korea, or outdoor, nightclub in Rome. So it's really fun. So that was kind of the traveling that I did in the pandemic, was all in my head and online.
That's so fun. So are there any parts of Anna Kay that are inspired by your life or plot points or characters? You mentioned you love dogs, and I know that's a huge theme in Anna Kay.
She has 2 giant black Newfoundlands, Gemma and Jon Snow, and I have one black Newfoundland named Gemma. I've always been obsessed with dogs. It's just, very important to me. So the storyline with the homeless man and the dog in Anna Kay really came from, there was a real part of Anna Karenina in the book where someone did get, almost hit by the train in the beginning. And she was like, oh no, this is an omen for things to come, to bring back the train. So I really wanted to do that as well. So I definitely had a lot of little Easter eggs that were definitely from the original that I wanted to do my own little wink at. In terms of personal life, absolutely. I'm married now. My second husband's amazing. And I had struggled, I had the idea in 2012 to write this, but I didn't start till 2018. And when we were on a road trip, with a dog, basically buying a puppy, basically, and driving cross country. And we were talking about like our next writing projects, because he's a kid's book writer as well.
Cool.
I told him about this. I'm like, I've tried so many times to figure it out, but reducing an 800-page novel to one that is no longer 800 pages is kind of difficult. And there's so many characters. Everyone's like, oh, Anna Kay has so many characters. I'm like, the original has double. Like, there's so many characters. And so it was kind of difficult. But then he was like, oh, but it's a great love story. And he's like, the best time to write a love story is when you're in love. And like, we were, definitely in love. We were in our first year of marriage. So it was super fun. And so he was right. It was very inspiring. So there's a lot of little winks to him. The 90s party, where there's like a whole 90s party. He actually picked all the songs from the 90s party himself. Like, he curated that whole list. It was all very specifically done. He's like, I don't do the pop songs that they're listening to in Soul Cycle, but I'll do and stuff. So, and my husband's, both of his parents were English teachers. So he's a great editor, and I am not the best at like editing. I'm great at writing in the characters, and I write very quickly. So I definitely need help in that department. And so he definitely line edited my book for me. So both of them, we have a good partnership going.
That's super cool. And did you have anyone who was in high school at the time that was like also checking to being like, yeah, this is cool to say, or this is totally how we talk?
I definitely did research. I have an assistant who was, I guess at the time she was 25, but she had, she was checking in with her friends and then her friends' younger siblings. And then my ex-boyfriend had a son who I had lived with for like 5 years when Dustin, his name is Dustin. That's why I named the character Dustin, when he was age 7 to 12. And so he's now in Wesleyan. So I was always checking with him as well. We were updating the slang, because that was a tricky thing, because I'm like, oh, if I put the slang in, it's going to date it. I knew it. I mean, and the music, etc. But I just made the choice to go ahead and do it, because I was like, oh, so it's of this time. It'll be fine. Because I really wanted to add the specificity. Like, I like that as a reader, like knowing like designers or the songs they're listening to, just because it like creates the world for me. We were changing the slang like up until like the book right before it went to print, because you get like first pass pages and second pass, and Snapchat was kind of like going under because there was a whole Snapchat thing. So I kind of reduced that, and like, TikTok is in the second book, but TikTok wasn't a thing in the first book because it hadn't started yet. So, but now because of the pandemic, the book has been dated forever, I think, honestly, because it's clearly, it basically takes place in 2019, because the Coachella they go to is the one I went to. In 2019.
I loved reading it during the pandemic, probably because it felt so fun to get to imagine normalcy again, and being like dancing next to people all sweaty and close to each other, and just how romantic everything was and aspirational to get to see these people living these beautiful lives in New York was so fun. And I just felt like I was living in that world for a while.
I'm glad. Yeah, that's what I wanted. I wanted an escapist, soapy, fun book. Obviously I tried to, tackle some serious issues as well, but that wasn't like, to me, the book is not about that. It's not like an issue-based book about, where I was trying to make big statements, etc. The one statement I did want to make is I wanted to show, like, give these female characters like strong voices and agency with their lives. And they weren't like waiting around always for the boy. You know what I mean? They took charge too and gave each other advice. So that was important to me.
I do love that. I think that is something I loved even about like seeing Anna and Stephen and all of them, is that they are all flawed characters, but they're all so beautiful and lovable. And I think that was so attractive about them.
The Stephen character was really fun because, I mean, you know, obviously everyone's always like, oh, your characters need to be likable. But I'm like, Stephen, we have to show, I mean, there is great wealth. There's definitely some there should be some entitlement. And there's a lot of like, you know, not so great rich people probably. So I wanted to use him as an example, but I was very carefully making sure that like in the beginning where he started would not be where he ended up. So by basically meeting Dustin, who was his homework tutor, who was like, you know, Black, Jewish, adopted, and went to public school and did not have money, I wanted to give them an unlikely friendship that would kind of change the course of Stephen's life by like finding someone, you know, in your life that's unexpected that give you a different perspective outside of your like rarefied bubble world of like dropping $2,000 on a limo for a night just because you feel like it, you know, stuff like that. So I was very careful about that because I didn't, you know, I knew I was writing about a rich world and I wanted to because it's like a fun sort of world that could be very visual. And there are definitely teenagers who live like that completely. So I wanted to like show that. But at the same time, I definitely felt like I had a little bit of responsibility as an author to like, you know, sometimes bring them back down to earth with, you know, real issues and problems that every teen faces.
Yeah. And I actually learned a couple of Korean words from you from this book. And I forget what it is already now, but when it was describing when it was early in the book when Stephen was jealous of Anna's perfect boyfriend and he was the one son that the other parents compared him to. The concept was not new to me. I could immediately recognize that in so many of the circles I had been in of parents comparing their kids together, but I hadn't heard the word before, which was really fun.
Not a great term. I actually can't speak Korean. But I knew that word. My parents obviously could speak Korean, but I just never learned actually, especially growing up in Tennessee, there were no other children to like speak it with, etc. And my parents were like, we need to fit in. You should speak, you know, English. So I actually don't know it. I can't even understand it, which is rare because a lot of kids can actually understand it, even though if they can't speak it. Now I have regrets about it. I wish I had learned. So even in Anna K. Away, the sequel, when she goes to Korea, there's a lot more Korean terms. So I had to do a lot of research and I did, you know, I have friends who were helping me and I was looking up modern slang guides. A funny story is Jenna Ushkowitz, who's Korean, does the audiobooks for both of them. She was the star of Glee.
I saw that.
She's adopted, so she didn't grow up in a Korean household at all, so she doesn't speak Korean. So when she's doing the audiobook, she's like, I don't know how to pronounce some of these Korean words. And I was like, I don't know how to pronounce some of these Korean words. So I had to call up my friend Lucy, who's a friend who I met at art school here in Brentwood. And I was like, she can speak Korean. And I'm like, can you pronounce some of these words? So she recorded them all on a voice memo, texted them to me. I texted them to Jenna Ushkowitz. And yeah, that was the chain of like whenever Jenna Ushkowitz says a Korean word, it's because of my friend Lucy.
Yeah, all the credit. It's like phonetically spelled to be able to pronounce it. That's awesome.
And actually, Lucy's daughter, Juliet, went to Interlochen, the theater camp that Lolly goes to. So I was able to get research from her. So I love
all these like nuggets of your life to come fused to bring this book together.
Absolutely.
I have a couple more questions for you. What has been, now that it's out in the world and paperback is even out and whatnot, I haven't listened to audio, but I'm kind of curious to hear that version too. What has been like the most meaningful response to this book for you?
Probably the most meaningful response. I mean, first off, Bookstagram wasn't a thing. It wasn't on my radar. I wasn't even on Instagram basically because I'm, you know, as a writer, I'm very prone to procrastination. So I'm like very careful with some of the things that I can like spiral into and, you know, that will eat up all of my time basically. But when the book was coming out for Anna K, in 2020, my publishers were like, you should do one social media. Like teens today or readers today really expect that from their authors. They want to be able to connect. And so I picked Instagram thinking that was probably the easiest, even though I'm not a great photographer. So I started taking pictures, but seeing your book all over the place, especially in the pandemic, because Anna K came out the week before everything shut down. My tour got canceled. Everything just stopped, basically. But seeing the book, like everyone photographing it all over the country and the world, really was great because I felt like I was like still like I was like okay because obviously the book was not as important of what was happening in the global pandemic, but for me I was like, oh, it was a personal thing to be able to finally to see the book. I had a lot of Asian girls reach out to me and say, oh my God, she's a main character. She's a lead. A lot of half Asian, girls being like, oh my God, it was so meaningful to me to be the lead. That was the idea. She is the star, the main character. It's exactly what you said. typically like, Asian characters or Black characters were sometimes like the sidekick or the best friend, and they were never the lead. And I'm like, Anna is the lead. Her brother is like a lead. So I was very careful to make sure that, I had a very, equal footing of that. So it was important to me. Very meaningful to see that and to hear it, to see it like listed in roundups for like celebrating AAPI month, etc. So it's been great. Things are really changing. It's great to see.
Yeah, it is really cool. And thank God you're on Instagram, Jenny, because that's how we got to connect.
Absolutely.
What is your advice that you have for any young aspiring Asian authors who'd want to be like you one day?
What I would say, where I am thankful very much to like my Korean upbringing, is that my parents definitely raised me to be like, you can do anything as long as you work hard, right? It's like, we know you're smart enough to get straight A's and to do XYZ if you put in the work. Like I had to do 2 hours of homework, whether I had it or not, every night at the kitchen table. So I either had to read a book or I had to be doing something like homework-y. So, I mean, they just trained me with a great work ethic that really has served me, because I know, and being an artist is a very unstable profession. Absolutely, 100%. I won't deny that. But I will say that what gave me the confidence to always try different, maybe I should try TV writing, or maybe I should write a children's book, because I wrote middle grade books before Anna Kay. I was like, is because they were like, you can do anything as long as you work hard and if you want it. So that I did take with me, and I completely owe it to them, that my upbringing, which is, it just gave me the confidence that I knew that if I wanted something and I was willing to work for it, I could get it. I was like, I'm at an age now where I was like, we always complain about our Korean parents and how strict they were. And they, they were how, it was just such a different upbringing when you see of some of your friends that are like so close with their parents and are very affectionate, etc. Where I was like, my parents rarely praised me, but I know when they did praise me, they meant it. Do you know what I mean? So it wasn't like, so when I got it, I'm like, oh, it's like, I don't know. So I'm like, I've worked on, a lot of that stuff, like internally, of like what is right. And I've taken all the good things from my upbringing and applied them to my life. And anything that didn't serve me well, I was like, okay, that's just not how I think.
I love that, though, that there was this sense of assurance and enough proof points in your life of like, oh, I have the work ethic, I'm capable of doing these things, to be able to take these risks along the way.
Yeah, I really feel like anyone who wants to be a writer, and if your parents aren't supporting, my parents were definitely not supportive of me at all. They just weren't. I remember I won in a national contest. It was like the Scholastic Literary Cavalcade magazine in high school. And I was like second.
Big deal.
I was in second place one, and my father, and I was like, see, I can be a writer. I won. He's like, you didn't win. You didn't win first place. He's like, you were only second. So to make it in this career, what did he know about being a writer, though, is my question. But I didn't know. Obviously, I would never talk back to my father at that age. But he was like, you can't make it because you didn't get first. And I was like, okay. But at the same time, I was like, that seemed not right to me. So I was like, well, then I should do the work to become first. And then, then I got into NYU. So who's laughing now?
Was there a moment for you where your dad conceded and was like, I'm very proud?
Yes. I mean, after I started school, we definitely had that moment where he was like, I think you're going to be okay. And I was like, oh, good. But he just said, he was like, you want it and I worked for it. So, I mean, I think there was a respect for that. I mean, they always sandwich it. They're like, we just want what's best for you. And you want stability and a higher education. It's just like their beliefs that they showed up with. So, I mean, obviously they want, for the children to be supported and whatnot, but it was just, there's been like all those, I mean, my mom was like so unhappy when I was getting divorced the first time. She was like, no, you can't. And I was like, really? You'd rather I'm unhappy and married than divorced and happy? And she's like, yes. And she just said yes. So, but, now I'm very happy in my marriage. So, but it was funny because my mom was always like, you need a man to take care of you. And I'm like, I don't think so. Modern women do not necessarily need a man to take care of them. They need men for like some other things, but not that.
Like to lift heavy boxes, but
help you put your air conditioner in your window, in a New York City apartment so it doesn't fall down and kill someone. That's what I needed a boy.
Luckily we can hire people for that now. So
absolutely. 100%.
Okay, my last question for you. What does life look like for you in the next 3 months?
Right now, I'm working on a project on a kids show that I created that I can't really say anything about yet. So I'm working in a mini writer's room with that. So that's kind of realizing a dream. I'm working on a couple features. I have a lot of stuff going in Hollywood. It seems like you need to have a lot of irons in the fire just because it's so up in the air about whether anything will go or get greenlit or ever get on air. So I always have a lot of projects going on. So hopefully I can have a chance to, I'm working with Margaret Cho on something, which is super fun because she's an idol of mine. So yeah, it's been great. I do think I would like to write a third Anna Kay book. It's not like in the works and official yet, but in my head, I've always thought there was going to be one more book.
That's so fun. Well, I love getting to hear about your life and feel like all this stuff seems so fun. So I hope you do share on Instagram so we can all follow along and get glimpses of it. And thank you so much for chatting and sharing about like your story, your writing process, even your journey of becoming a writer, and even memories of your family. I think so many of us Asian Americans can relate to a lot of that, and to get to see you just elevating so many Asian voices and stories, I think is really powerful. So really appreciate it.
No, thanks for reaching out. I'm happy to be here. So, thank you. And you have to let me know what you think of the sequel.